Welcome to Nerds at Church, a queer feminist podcast diving deep into faith, nerdery, and the Bible. I'm Pastor Emily, and I use pronouns like they, them, theirs.
And I'm Pastor Kay, and my pronouns are she, her. In this episode, we'll discuss the Daughters of Zelophehad and collective power. The story of the Daughters of Zelophehad does not come up in the lectionary or really in non-scholarly media at all, because sexism.
Pretty much.
So instead of giving you non-existent connections to them, we'd like to give our Patreon supporters a shout-out in this episode, because without you, this podcast would not be feasible. So thank you so much to
Bridget Watley,
Pace Warfield,
Lowell Chilton,
Paul Bennett,
Pastor Eric L. Bodenstab,
Andrew Walker,
Sojin,
and Elizabeth P. You guys make our day every day. Thank you.
For sure. If you want your name on that list, you can become a Patreon supporter for more content and your name on the list at patreon.com/nerdsatchurch. And check out the episode description for any links to references we make in this episode. And now we begin. So our overarching theme for this episode is collaboration and collective power. All of our heroes are very much not isolated in what they do. And I particularly love it. Our biblical heroes, some of the earlier times that I was learning about them was in the context of community organizing. And so I really love them for that aspect, but also all three of our heroes work with others and have a deep-rooted sense of community, and not just community support, but also community accountability and responsibility for their community, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah. And with this theme, we're pushing back against the idea that a hero has to work alone, or that they have to do everything themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That is, we've talked about it, I think, a little bit before. MLK is one of the clearest examples of that since his assassination, he has been painted as the one leader of all the things. And when we let that happen, it makes it harder for any of us to think that we could be heroes, that we could lead, that we could resist. And so that's a huge part of why we push back the way that we do on isolation versus collective work.
Yeah. So, our first supporting hero today, our hero from history, is Wilma Mankiller. She lived from 1945 to 2010, and she was the first woman president of the Cherokee Nation. She was born the middle child of 11 children in Oklahoma to a Cherokee father and a white mother, and she grew up on her family's land allotment in Oklahoma, where she had a lot of connection to her father's Cherokee heritage and family, but they also lived in extreme poverty while they were there. So when she was 11 years old, she and her immediate family moved to San Francisco, California, in the hopes of better job prospects for her parents, and also to be nearby to her mom's mom, who was living in the area at the time. And she experienced racism in the school system and disconnect from her heritage and community in this area, and so she spent a year living with her mom's mom at that point in order to get her confidence back, and then went back to the public school system and rejoined her family after that. And she graduated high school and met and married her husband, who was from Ecuador. They had 2 daughters together. And after her daughters were born, Wilma enrolled in a local junior college, and she enjoyed school kind of for the first time, because she really hadn't enjoyed high school because of all that racism involved. But now she got to just take the classes that interested her, and so she really bloomed academically. And this is where she was also introduced to the concept of activism for the first time, because she was attending classes during the events of the occupation of Alcatraz by the local Red Power movement at the time. And she learned organizational and paralegal skills while she was there. And so after this, she became a social worker and worked as a social worker for several years. And she worked with multiple local Native American organizations before eventually moving back to Oklahoma with her mother and her daughters after her father had died and she and her husband had gotten a divorce. And when she was in Oklahoma, she finished her bachelor's degree and she started grad school through the University of Arkansas. And she was involved in a serious car accident in 1979 that also actually killed a dear friend of hers. And this accident changed her approach to life. As quoted in a Wikipedia article about her, she was interviewed in 1993 on NPR, and she said, "I think the Cherokee approach to life is being able to continually move forward with kind of a good mind and not focus on the negative things in your life and the negative things you see around you, but focus on the positive things and try to look at the larger picture and keep moving forward. It also taught me to look at the larger things in life rather than focusing on small things, and it's also awfully hard to rattle me after having faced my own mortality. So the things I learned from those experiences actually enabled me to lead. Without those experiences, I don't think I would have been able to lead. I think I would have gotten caught up in a lot of nonsensical things." And so after that car accident and after extensive recovery from that car accident, she started working on healthcare and education-focused community development programs as a grant writer. And during this time, she raised millions of dollars over the next few years. And because of her hard work, she came to the attention of the then president of the Cherokee Nation, who was named Ross Swimmer. And he eventually asked her to be his running mate, despite the fact that they belonged to different political parties. He was a Republican and she was a Democrat. And she faced serious issues while running with him, including violence due to cultural sexism, as traditionally Cherokee women did not hold official offices or titles. So she was actually the first person to run for vice president who was a woman. And this is all despite the fact that women were the center of the familial organization in Cherokee culture, but the sexism she faced was serious.
The system that exists now in the contemporary Cherokee Nation is different from the ancestral Cherokee Nation, where there's not just the center of familial organization, but there were particular roles for women, but the ways that settler colonialism has influenced and harmed Native people cannot be understated. And one of the ways that's not as lifted up is the ways that it brought sexism full force into communities and tribes.
Yeah, as I was reading about her first election, it kind of sounded like she didn't really have enough time to explain to people that the reason why they were being so sexist about this was because of white people. But she was actually making that argument at the time. So anyway, she and Ross Swimmer barely won that first election, and she was the deputy chief of the Cherokee Nation for 2 years, or the vice president. Their terms, I think, are used interchangeably. And after 2 years, Swimmer left the presidency to take a position in the United States federal government, and she became president for the rest of his term, which was less than a year. And during that time, she also remarried, and then she went through her first election for president, under her own name, and she narrowly won that election, again, making that argument about how the sexism in our culture is not from us, it's from white people, basically. And that first election also involved a court case over a recount of the vote. That is what eventually won her the election. And her early program focus as president was again on healthcare, education, and similar social services due to cuts made by the Reagan administration. And wow, did she have lengthy opinions about the Reagan administration? Don't we all? But later on, she got more into economic development, it sounds like, and while she was initially concerned about the tribe using gambling parlors as a revenue source, she eventually came around to the idea, and that became a significant revenue source for the Cherokee Nation. She also dealt with a major lawsuit about water and mineral rights over the Arkansas River during her first term, and there was also a disagreement with another tribe about state taxes, and just continual disagreements with the federal government about tribal self-governance, and she worked extensively with other tribes on that subject as well. And for that matter, she also had many health struggles while in office and throughout her life, not all of which stemmed from that one big car accident, but some of them did. She won her second election to the presidency in a landslide. It was over 80% of the vote that she received. She had no trouble being reelected at all.
Fantastic.
And she, at that point, also met with the Bush administration about Native rights, because this administration was much more open to hearing directly from the tribes than Reagan's administration had been. And the lawsuit over the Arkansas River continued and was a major focus of her second term as well. And she also revived a boarding high school for Native girls. This was not one of those Indian boarding schools that you've heard about. This was a boarding school that had been started and funded and run by the tribe itself. that focused on providing resources for Native girls. And it had had to shut down due to money troubles, but she brought it back. And she also presided over a crackdown on artists who were not Native, who were selling artwork that they described as Native in style, and really was part of changing the laws about how all that works. And she also dealt with a big change in the legal issues over who could officially join the Cherokee Nation, and that remained a serious concern for her second term as well. Mm-hmm. During these years, she published her autobiography, and she also became close friends with Gloria Steinem. And she moderated a forum of all 545 Native tribes that were recognized at the time by the United States government in 1994. And then after she was diagnosed with lymphoma, she decided to not run for a third term, although the election following this was legally complicated and led to some issues with how her administration left office. It sounds like the next group of people running were just not very experienced because she'd been in charge for a very long time by this point. And so it was kind of messy on the way out. But she returned to activism at this point and also returned to the lecture circuit, despite having a second kidney transplant. And she edited and co-authored a few books on women's history and Native women's history in particular. And by this point, she had also received a whole bunch of honorary degrees from various universities like Dartmouth and Yale and so on from around the world. And unfortunately, she died at the age of 64 of pancreatic cancer, and her papers are now housed at the University of Oklahoma. So that is the story of Wilma Mankiller, the first woman president of the Cherokee Nation, who was also previously the first woman vice president of the Cherokee Nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She's fantastic. I have really loved her. And I heard about her first through learning about the work she did with water access for the Cherokee Nation before she was elected as deputy chief or principal chief. But yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
Also, I really love that she was one of the candidates for the $20 bill in the campaign to put a woman on the $20 bill.
Yeah,
United States 20.
She was a great candidate for that. I wish we had.
I wish she had too, because there's also something so poetic about Andrew Jackson being replaced by Wilma Mankiller, the president who caused perhaps the most direct and very explicitly intentional harm to Native people out of all of them, being replaced by the first woman to be principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. Would have been just such beautiful poetic justice. Also, I think that, Harriet Tubman is a great one. Oh, sure. Harriet Tubman's an interesting choice because, she was so very clearly against capitalism. Yeah. It's like, okay, but yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was stunning how she had to fight through poverty, racism, sexism, and also a lifetime of serious health concerns. Like I said, she had 2 kidney transplants and a variety of other issues in order to improve the lives of her people and an awful lot of people. It wasn't just about Cherokee folks for her, it was about everybody. Yeah. And so for our tie-in to today's theme, throughout her life, she encouraged collaboration between many different Native-centered organizations of different tribes and regions, and also between women of all ethnic groups, in order to improve the lives of those living on the margins of society without access to a social safety net.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also thought, so as you mentioned in your summary, she was a liberal Democrat and served under a conservative Republican when she was deputy chief, and yet she was known as a uniter of all people. Yeah. And I think that is so essential to what community organizing does, to what collaboration and cooperative work does. And not that it takes what is in the middle between Republican and Democrat or between liberal and conservative and just takes the middle, but...
Right. No, she wasn't a moderate. She was herself.
Yeah, and she did so much progressive work, and she didn't compromise her values. And yet, somehow, she still managed to unite people. And again, this was back before we shifted from we have different ways of getting to the same end goal to we have different end goals because the way is the end goal in politics. But I also just have the, most recent presidential debate in my head that happened 2 days ago. And so I'm just like, she embodies so much of what good leadership does, both in the community organizing and the collaboration and cooperation, but also in the clear progressive values that don't get compromised.
Sure.
Even as there's other things that are compromises and that are creative ways of working together and stuff.
It's almost like if you're willing to work together in good faith with people who you disagree with, you can actually get stuff done. Huh.
Yeah,
That
weird.
sounds useful.
Weird. Mm-hmm.
And so for media about her, there is a documentary about her called The Mankiller Documentary. And also the movie The Cherokee Word for Water covers one of her projects in Oklahoma about water.
The Cherokee Word for Water was the movie I was trying to find when I found the documentary about her.
Okay.
The Cherokee Word for Water was my first main introduction to her, and we saw it in seminary. And yeah, I highly, highly, highly recommend The Cherokee Word for Water, and I'm excited to now know about the Mankiller documentary.
Cool.
And to check that out.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's also her autobiography, Mankiller, A Chief and Her People, which sounds excellent.
Mm-hmm. Yes. She's written a lot, so there's lots of other options too, but that is the big one. Yeah. So our other hero, our pop culture hero for this episode is Echo, who comes from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel Comics. And Echo, the superhero, is Maya Lopez, is the character's actual name. And in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, she is Choctaw and deaf. And she was born in Tamaha and then moved to New York as a kid after her mother's tragic death, and was raised by Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin, after her dad was killed. Kingpin is evil. And so we just recorded our Deadpool 2 movie commentary, and I think it's interesting to see the different ways that Deadpool as an anti-hero and Echo as a hero who starts out on the villain's side, like how their journeys are both similar and different. But in the comics, Echo, Maya Lopez, is a member of the Cheyenne Nation with photographic reflexes, so anything she sees, she can do, and she's an expert in piano. And in the comics, she was the first to take on the mantle of Ronin while hunting down organized crime members, and then later works with New Avengers. And she is deaf in the comics and in the movies and in the cinema stuff. And in the comics, she does not speak audibly. In the shows, she sometimes does. And she likes Pop-Tarts and cookies from the Levian Bakery. And in the comics, she has a white handprint that covers part of her face. That's part of how her echo shows up, which is very reminiscent of the red handprints that are used to raise awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. Yeah. And so then she debuted on TV in Hawkeye, and then stars in her own spin-off of Echo. And the comics were created by David Mack, who was influenced by his Cherokee uncle in creating the character, and Joe Quesada, who was the artist, and first appeared in Daredevil number 9 in 1999, and was thought of kind of as a counterpoint to Daredevil, who's blind and so experiences the world primarily through auditory stuff, and so she, because she is deaf, experiences the world primarily through visual stuff. And so that was part of the background to her being created. Her powers include photographic reflexes, ancestral communication, which is where the echo comes from, that she is an echo of all of her ancestors, enhanced strength, memory recall, where she can actually remember things that her ancestors experienced, and healing. She also has a bazillion abilities in terms of fighting, and including knowing how to sew up injuries and stuff. And she is multilingual. She understands and communicates in English and in Choctaw and in sign. And she is played by Alaqua Cox, who is a Menominee and Mohican deaf actress with a partial leg amputation. And her younger self is played by Darnell Bessa, who is actually Cox's maternal cousin, which is really cool. And I love Echo and the way that she has her own journey of realizing who is evil and who is good, and the complicated nature of her relationship to her extended family when she is moved away from them, but also the complications of a family who doesn't approve of her dad, who's tied up in crime and in like mafia type crimes, which get her mother killed. And so the distance, right? The distance and the pain and all of the stuff that goes into how they navigate those familial relationships, which is...
Sure.
Yeah. And so Echo is known for working with Kingpin and the power that echoes through the ancestors and the power to heal, like her mom had.
So does she heal herself or does she heal other people? Or both?
I think both. I know she can heal other people.
Sure.
And I think she can also heal herself, but there's one scene in the show where she's talking to her mom after her mom has died, and her mom is talking, and there's an emotional healing, right? Like, it's not just physical healing, because she actually like starts to heal Kingpin emotionally, and he walks away, and so we don't know if she finished or not, but there's a sense when she's talking to her mom about the healing that, like, there is a healing that needs to happen for her. And she gets to the point where she's doing that healing. But it's hard to know if it's her mom. I think she can heal herself because the ancestors can heal her, right? Okay. And there's that connection because they echo through her.
Sure.
But, yeah, so I think she can heal both herself and other people. Part of what is really unique about her is that she is deaf. She's one of the few deaf characters in comics, and specifically deaf superheroes in comics. And I love that she is played by a person who is native and deaf and disabled. Yeah. Instead of, like, there's so much where, I mean, the movement among disability rights and disabled communities of let disabled people play disabled people.
Yeah.
And there's so many people who are like, oh, we can't do this because of this or that or the other terrible reason. And this is a great example of, no, you can. You're choosing not to. And I think that the show is better, specifically because Alaqua Cox is playing Maya, and because she is deaf, and because she does have a partial leg amputation. That makes it so much more realistic and so much deeper and richer of a character and of a show.
Yeah. And I also love that they introduced her on Hawkeye's TV show, because he is deaf and or hard of hearing, depending on which timeline you're in the comics. Yeah. And giving her a direct tie like that to another character with the same disability is important and also really rare to find in pop culture. So often people with a particular disability are the unicorn of their neighborhood, and you never meet anyone else who's in the same situation.
Yeah, I watched Echo before I watched Hawkeye, so it was really fun to watch the whole of Echo and then go back and watch Hawkeye and watch their timelines and their stories weave together, knowing what comes after it. It was just a really cool tie-in. And yeah, the spaces where they speak in ASL to each other and all of that stuff is really cool. Yeah. Also, there's one point where Echo says to Kingpin about her ancestors, they're in my blood, in my heart. I'm a part of them, and they're a part of me. I'm their legacy, not yours. And this gets into the tie-in to today's theme, right? That she was taken away from her community, and she lived so much in isolation. And so much of how Kingpin raised her was isolated, was just her and him and an interpreter who eventually was killed because they couldn't let him know all the things. But there's so much isolation in that, and she doesn't start to really come into her own until she is recognizing her connection and reestablishing her connection to her family in Tamaha and her connection to other people outside of just like Kingpin and her, which is really cool. And the other big tie-in, and part of why I was so excited about her with this theme in particular, is there's this point, and this is spoilers if you haven't seen the whole series. This happens towards the end of the series, but she has left and gone back to her hometown and has noticed the ways that her hometown is being manipulated by the various mafia and stuff. And so ultimately she disrupts that stuff, and she has a showdown with all the big bads at the Choctaw powwow. And in that, the power from all the generations and all of her ancestors, which has been kind of echoing and popping up throughout the show, comes into that place and empowers not just her, but empowers her and all of the women, like her cousins, her grandma, all of them, in this defense of the Choctaw people and in this defense of their people. And that's where Taloa Lopez, Maya's mom, echoes into her memories and says, you aren't alone. All of us that came before are a part of you because we echo through you. Echo. And so that's where echo comes from. And I just love that expansiveness of superpowers and of connection. And it makes so much sense in that context, right? Like, of course that's how it's going to work. So, yeah, I just really love that part. Yeah. There are a couple main media ways for you to check out Echo. Her first, solo comic series, where it's just about her, is Phoenix Song Echo. So if you want to dive deeper into her in a comic sense, that's a great way to do it. Otherwise, the show Echo, which is on Disney Plus, is great. And then looking at Daredevil in the comics or Hawkeye in the cinematic sense, both have her getting tied in with other characters and getting tied in with other disabled superheroes, which is really cool. So great. All of those are great options for more media about Echo. Echo, yeah. Echo, Echo.
Wonderful. And then our main hero for today's episode are the Daughters of Zelophehad, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And one of the interesting things about them, you've heard us talk about how women are often not named in the Bible. All but one time that the Daughters of Zelophehad are name-checked in the Bible, they are actually individually named by their names. It's not just the Daughters of Zelophehad, but they are listed individually. And so that's quite unusual.
Yeah, we're worse at naming them outside of the Bible, like in conversation, than the Bible is, which is rare.
Yeah, that's pretty unusual.
I love Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They're my favorites. Some of my favorites.
Absolutely. And so we'll link you to a brief encyclopedia article from the Jewish Women's Archive about them, and also you can find the beginning of their story in Numbers chapter 27, verses 1 through 11. So what is their story? Well, a man named Zelophehad, as you might have guessed, had 5 daughters, named Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And he also had no sons. And so he died while the Jewish people were traveling the wilderness with Moses after leaving slavery in Egypt. And because he had no sons, Moses assumed that his property should go to his brothers. But the daughters of Zelophehad, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, objected to this and said that they should inherit because they didn't have any brothers to look after them. And so Moses asked God, which seems like a reasonable option, like when in doubt, check with God, sure. And God said, the women are right, and then specifically established that the order of inheritance was first to sons, then to daughters, then to brothers, then to fathers' brothers, and if there weren't any of those, you looked for the nearest kinsman, and that person would inherit.
Mm-hmm. And so then, because that would be too simple and easy, the women's male relatives objected and said that when they married out of the tribe, their inheritance would go with them and their father's inheritance shouldn't leave the tribe. And it's important to note that one of the things that was unique is that Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah's father, Zelophehad, had died but had not been part of the generation that rebelled against God. So his death was a normal death, I guess.
Yeah.
And so Moses made the women agree to not marry outside of their tribe, and then still didn't give them their inheritance. And so later in Numbers 36, the women have to go back to Moses and remind him, and again he still doesn't give them their inheritance. And finally, after Moses dies, they go to Joshua in Joshua 17, who inherited Moses' authority, and Joshua gives them their inheritance. And so there's this sense of continued pushback that they receive just from inaction from particularly Moses, which I have feelings about.
Yeah.
But they have a very lasting impact that is fantastic. So they actually changed the inheritance laws, as Kay mentioned, but also they were used as a source for legal cases around inheritance in regular judicial systems outside of Judaism or Christianity, which is really cool because they literally had legal ramifications for us today, which is awesome.
And they are also known because they just kept insisting. They kept going back to Moses. And because they kept insisting, they managed to change the rule not just for themselves, but for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And they did it publicly.
Yes.
This is one of the things that I love most about them. They could have just gone to Moses quietly and said, "Hey, Moses, will you make an exception? This is our unique situation. Please accommodate us." And then Moses could have decided. But instead, they go and they meet Moses publicly. So the whole community knows about it. And so then when Moses is like, "Well, I got to talk to God about it," then God says, "Duh, Moses, the women are right." There's this higher accountability. And this greater communal accountability of Moses has to follow. And then when they go back to Moses and back to Moses and then to Joshua, like they have a basis because everybody knew what was happening at that time.
Right. Yeah, I love the fact, first, that of course no one came up with the idea that a man from a different tribe marrying one of these women could just change which tribe he belonged to. That would be impossible. Mm-hmm. Only women can do that when they get married.
That would be like men changing their last name when they get married. Weird.
I actually know a guy who did that. Yeah, a little creativity could go a long way. I also love the fact that it's Moses who is so stubborn about refusing to give them their inheritance, because a guy with a sister like Miriam should know better. I realize this is entirely made up, but in my head, when I imagine Moses going about his business after refusing them the first time for the rest of his life until he died, I like to think that Miriam was following him around, banging on her tambourine, and telling him that he should give the Daughters of Zelophehad their justice.
Yes.
He really should have known better.
Yeah, he should have. He should have times like a million. Yeah.
And so their tie-in to today's theme is that the sisters stuck together and they kept insisting on what they needed, and in the end they changed the rule for everyone. They also very much give me a flashback to, well, I guess a flash forward, to Jesus' story of the persistent widow who kept banging on the door of the unfair judge, and he finally gave her justice, not because she deserved justice, but because he just wanted to go to sleep.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And when I think of that scene that I described in Echo at the Choctaw powwow, it gives me Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah vibes, right? It is this is one, and the echo bounces for everyone. That power echoes through everyone, that the change echoes through everyone, and then echoes back, right? It's not just a one-way thing. Yeah. But I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Other themes that tie in with all of these, a lot of what I think is interesting is the ways that indigeneity is a theme, a complicated one. Wilma Mankiller is Cherokee. Echo is, she's Choctaw or Cheyenne. And then the Daughters of Zelophehad, what we haven't said is they are part of a larger group of people who are invading a land and taking over an already inhabited land.
Yes, but also they escaped slavery, and they are a persecuted minority because all of the other countries around them want them dead. So, yeah, there's some intersecting issues there.
Yeah. Well, yes, they escaped slavery, and there is a need for, like, okay, where are you going to live? You need a place. But their response to that and their interpretation of God's words is go kill all the people in the land and take it for your own. And it's complicated. And also, when we dig into the Bible, it's complicated because there is such deeply rooted liberation in the story of the Exodus up until the point they take over and they're tasked with genocide, right? With colonization and wiping out the original inhabitants. And so it's complicated. It is a situation where there no doubt could have been another way to do this that did not involve destroying people or communities. That has happened in other ways, right? Before the nation of Israel came to be, Jewish people were living in the Middle East and in Palestine among Palestinians and speaking Arab, and it actually worked. And then this nation of Israel was created and became a power that pushed out Palestinians, that is currently working towards genocide against Palestinians, that changed the language that was required to be spoken, all of that stuff. So those echoes are echoes still today of conflict and complicated relationships, biblically and culturally.
And also, I think the interaction of being part of a marginalized society and knowing how to collaborate on your work, those two things exist in concert together for good reason, because it's so often the people who are marginalized who have to learn how to collaborate in order to get things done.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. And that's why divide and conquer is such a strategy, right? Yeah. If we can divide and conquer marginalized groups and keep them from working together, power can be maintained over them. But when marginalized communities work together, that's when the true collective power, right? When we have concern for each other, that is when our power is so much stronger. Yeah. And now for our Muppets moment.
Yay!
Okay. Which Muppet would you cast for which hero?
Well, when I was thinking about Wilma Mankiller and being a Muppet, I was struck as I read through the story of her life and work, primarily by two characteristics. First, that she seemed to be a deeply organized person who was constantly surrounded by chaos. Just the constant stuff she was dealing with, constantly changing issues and forces. She seemed like a little island of competence and organization in the middle of this giant ocean of chaos. And then secondly, and this is me reading into her because I don't know this for sure, but I also get a certain amount of a sense of exasperation. Like, I've also spoken previously on how the older I get, the less irritated I am with Paul, the author of so many of the letters of the New Testament, because it seems like it's not so much that he hates other people, it's that he is exasperated with them and is thinking to himself, none of you are ready for any of this. And I definitely got that sense from Wilma Mankiller as she was trying to, herd these cats into these 4,000 different issues that she was trying to deal with. And so as I think about Muppets who are organized and also exasperated, I immediately went to Scooter, the stage manager of the Muppet Show. And I think that, if we're doing a gender-blind cast, I think he would make a lovely Wilma Mankiller for a large part of her work.
I love that.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, and the crowd around them when they are talking to Moses. And the crowd just struck me as the Yip Yips, where, like, when they first go to Moses, they're like, nope, 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 nope. And then Moses goes to God, and then Moses comes back from God and is like, okay. And they're like, yep, 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 yep. And just like that switch that they do was, that I was like, that has to be where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think my thought that I had as I was trying to cast the Daughters of Zelophehad, my first instinct was anytime you need a crowd of Muppets, of like more than 4 Muppets at a time, so often it is the Yip Yips, actually. But the thing is, you know what? The Yip Yips don't have individual names, and the Daughters of Zelophehad do.
Yeah.
So they can't be the Daughters of Zelophehad. I love them as the crowd, that's great.
Yep.
Or even, like, I suppose it would be chronologically incorrect, but they sort of strike me as a Greek chorus for Moses. Paul would probably love that. But yeah, they can't be the Daughters of Zelophehad, but they do work great as a Greek chorus for Moses. And the daughters themselves, I don't know, I would love to see them as Miss Piggy's cousins or something, because they do all need their individual names, and also they have to be incredibly stubborn. So
yes, I was thinking about that too, because I was like, I mean, Miss Piggy, but also, you can't just cast Miss Piggy 5 times.
Right.
But Miss Piggy does have an extended family, and I think that,
And, if that ends up with the Daughters of Zelophehad also being from space, I'm okay with that. That's fine. They can be from space.
Just to keep echoing season 4 into season 5.
Right.
I love that. I think that is fantastic. Yeah. I mean, okay, there's Miss Piggy, Annie Sue. I'm just looking at all the ones that look like they're related to Miss Piggy. Denise, Miss Poogie, Spamela.
Well, and also, what if we had Janice as the oldest daughter, so that she could sing of all of the various issues?
Yeah.
Because we don't know that she's not related to Miss Piggy. I mean, I don't know.
It's true. They're all Muppets, right? Yeah. Oh, so that is 5, but...
I was thinking we weren't actually including Miss Piggy herself.
Oh.
Or Miss Piggy could be Miriam, following Moses around with a tambourine.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I think it is spectacular.
Great.
Awesome. Yeah, I love this. I love this casting. Nice.
So, thanks for joining us, and our theme music was by Rachel Meyer-Laughlin, Muppet music was by Brenda Boss, and seasonal artwork was by Pace Warfield, who's also one of our Patreons. Catch us next time when we'll dive into Jesus!
Woo woo! And Jesus! And Jesus!
This podcast has been produced by us, Kay Rohloff and Emily Ewing. For more fun, check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Blue Sky at nerdsatchurch, or contact us at nerdsatchurch@gmail.com.
Also, if you like what you've heard, rate us or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, or wherever you catch your podcasts. If you want access to our uncut guest episodes, merch discounts, movie commentaries, and more, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/nerdsatchurch. Starting at just $5 per month, it is way cheaper than a legal battle over inheritance.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, let us know on Blue Sky, Facebook, or Twitter which Muppet would you cast for which hero.
As the ancient Christian said, Pax
Pax
Vobiscum.